6, 2024 at about 7 p.m. in the building behind us, which is, of course, the Kremlin. The interview, as you will see if you watch it, is primarily about the war in progress, the war in Ukraine, how it started, what's happening, and most pressingly, how it might end. One note before you watch. At the beginning of the interview, we asked the most obvious question, which is, why did you do this? Did you feel a threat, an imminent physical threat? And that's your justification. And the answer we got shocked us. Putin went on for a very long time, probably half an hour, about the history of Russia going back to the 8th century. And honestly, we thought this was a filibustering technique and found it annoying and interrupted him several times. And he responded he was annoyed by the interruption. But we concluded in the end, for what it's worth, that it was not a filibustering technique. There was no time limit on the interview. We ended it after more than 2 hours.
One, you can't hear me.
Instead, what you're about to see seemed to us sincere, whether you agree with it or not. Vladimir Putin believes
the
Russia
default mic
has an
is
historic claim to parts of Western
kind of set
Ukraine.
up. I'm sure maybe you can hear me. I don't know. Maybe
to view it in that light as a sincere expression.
I should be. I pushed the streaming button and.
Mr. President, thank you. On February 22nd, 2022, you addressed your country in a nationwide address when the conflict in Ukraine started. And you said that you were acting because you had come to the conclusion that the United States, through NATO, might initiate a, quote, surprise attack on our country. And to American ears, that sounds paranoid. Tell us why you believe the United States might strike Russia out of the blue. How did you conclude that?
It's not that America, the United States, was going to launch a surprise strike on Russia. I didn't say that. Are we having a talk show or a serious conversation?
Here's the quote. Thank you. It's a formidable, serious talk.
Because your basic education is in history, as far as I understand.
Yes.
So if you don't mind, I will take only 30 seconds or 1 minute to give you a short reference to history for giving you a little historical background.
Please.
Let's look where our relationship with Ukraine started from. Where did Ukraine come from? The Russian state started gathering itself as a centralized statehood, and it is considered to be the year of the establishment of the Russian state in 862.
I didn't have my mic enabled.
When the townspeople of Novgorod invited a
have the mic
Varangian
enabled now.
prince,
We're going to play
Rurik,
some
from
Fortnite while we're
Scandinavia to
watching
reign.
the Tucker Putin interview on
In
Band Video because
1862,
I don't
Russia
have
celebrated the 1000th
X
anniversary of
spaces,
its
and
statehood.
this is the way I have it set up. So
And in Novgorod, there is a memorial
taking it serious, but I'm
dedicated to
also
the
like
1000th
just playing
anniversary
some
of the country.
Fortnite. It's a big thing, right? So
In 882, Rurik's successor, Prince Oleg,
that'd be
who
cool
was
to
actually playing the role of regent at
put it on
Rurik's
here.
young son.
I'm on my old PC and nothing was set up, so
Because
I
Rurik had
just,
died by that time.
like
came to
decided about
Kiev.
an hour beforehand to just stream this and whatever. It's
He
like
ousted
history,
two
right?
brothers
It's like a
who
moon landing. I
apparently
wish I could have
had
watched it on Twitter
once
because
been members of Rurik's squad.
like it's gonna be pretty big. I could
So
try.
Russia began to develop with two centers of power, Kiev and
if I can get it
Novgorod.
done in between now and then, no big deal.
The next very significant date in the history of Russia was 988.
I think I have to sign
This
up
was
for
the baptism of Russia.
Anyway,
When
I'll shut
Prince
up. I'm gonna
Vladimir,
play some
the
Fortnite.
great-grandson of Rurik, baptized Russia and adopted Orthodoxy, or Eastern Christianity. From this time, the centralized Russian state began to strengthen. Why? Because of the single territory, integrated economic ties, one and the same language, and, after the baptism of Russia, the same faith and rule of the prince. The centralized Russian state began to take shape. Back in the Middle Ages, Prince Yaroslav the Wise introduced the order of succession to a throne. But after he passed away, it became complicated for various reasons. The throne was passed not directly from father to eldest son, but from the prince who had passed away to his brother, then to his sons in different lines. All this led to the fragmentation and the end of Rus as a single state. There was nothing special about it. The same was happening then in Europe. But the fragmented Russian state became an easy prey to the empire created earlier by Genghis Khan. His successors, namely Batu Khan, came to Rus, plundered and ruined nearly all the cities. The southern part, including Kiev, by the way, and some other cities, simply lost independence, while northern cities preserved some of their sovereignty. They had to pay tribute to the horde, but they managed to preserve some part of their sovereignty. And then a unified Russian state began to take shape with its center in Moscow. The southern part of Russian lands, including Kiev, began to gradually gravitate towards another magnet, the center that was emerging in Europe. This was the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. It was even called the Lithuanian-Russian Duchy, because Russians were a significant part of this population. They spoke the old Russian language and were Orthodox. But then there was a unification, the union of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland. A few years later, another union was signed, but this time already in the religious sphere. Some of the Orthodox priests became subordinate to the Pope. Thus, these lands became part of the Polish-Lithuanian state. During decades, the Poles were engaged in Polonization of this part of the population. They introduced their language there, tried to entrench the idea that this population was not exactly Russians, that because they lived on the fringe, they were Ukrainians. Originally, the word Ukrainian meant that a person was living on the outskirts of the state, along the fringes, or was engaged in a border patrol service. It didn't mean any particular ethnic group. So the Poles were trying to, in every possible way, to colonize this part of the Russian lands and actually treated it rather harshly, not to say cruelly. All that led to the fact that this part of the Russian lands began to struggle for their rights. They wrote letters to Warsaw,
it says, warning, heads up, we
that their rights be
detected
observed, and people be
video in your
commissioned
stream
here,
belonging to someone else. Your
including
stream
to
may
Kiev.
be temporarily
Can you tell us
blocked. We
what
plan
period?
to
I'm losing track of where in history we are. The Polish oppression of Ukraine.
continue. Please ensure that you're the
13th
content
century.
owner. Like, this is totally different than the stream as far as like, you know, maybe I need to throw a Fortnite window up there or something in the
Now I will tell you what happened later.
top right corner, and then it's not the same. You know, you detect these
And give
nuts.
the dates so that there is no confusion. And in 1654, even a bit earlier, the people who were in control of the authority over that part of the Russian lands
They just don't want it. They don't want to broadcast. That's
addressed
all.
Warsaw.
That's all that
I
means.
repeat,
Like, oh, we're
demanding that they
watching
send
this
them to
too,
rulers of Russian
and
origin
we've seen
and
that you're
Orthodox
rebroadcasting this to your
faith.
friends,
When Warsaw did not
and it belongs
answer
to somebody
them,
else. Even though,
and in
even
fact
even
rejected
though
their demands, they
prior
turned
to this,
Moscow,
there's
so that
express
Moscow took them away.
consent to rebroadcast it.
So
This
that you
company
don't
has
think that
already
I'm
said,
inventing things.
you can rebroadcast it. We want you to rebroadcast it.
I'll
But
give you these
YouTube
documents.
has said,
Well,
we don't want you rebroadcasting this, so it belongs to somebody
sure
else.
why
So
it's
we're gonna
relevant to what
snuff
happened.
it, right, or whatever. What did they say?
These are documents from the archives.
Shit, I don't
copies.
remember.
Here are the letters from Bogdan Khmelnytsky,
Shadow
the
ban.
man who then controlled
Shadow
the power
sink
in
it.
this part of the
Sink these
Russian
nuts.
lands that is now called Ukraine. He wrote to Warsaw demanding that their rights be upheld, and after being refused, he began to write letters to Moscow, asking to take them under the strong hand of the Moscow Tsar. There are copies of these documents. I will leave them for your good memory. There is a translation into Russian. You can translate it into English later. Russia would not agree to admit them straight away, assuming that the war with Poland would start. Nevertheless, in 1654, the Pan-Russian Assembly of top clergy and landowners, headed by the Tsar, which was the representative body of the power of the old Russian state, decided to include a part of the old Russian lands into Moscow Kingdom. As expected, the war with Poland began. It lasted 13 years, and then in 1654, a truce was concluded. And 32 years later, I think, a peace treaty with Poland, which they called Eternal Peace, was signed. And these lands, the whole left bank of Dnieper, including Kiev, went to Russia. And the whole right bank
Yeah,
of
but
Dnieper
it's not going to
remained
go to
in
any of my
Poland.
hashtags or anything. But
Under
which
the
is
rule
fine,
of Catherine the
like,
Great, Russia reclaimed all of its historical lands, including in the south and west.
I think it's like facial
This all
recognition probably
lasted
that it
until
does
the
based off
revolution.
of. They're like, yo,
Before
Tucker,
World War
and this is happening. Put
Austrian
up a
general
filter
staff relied on the ideas
for
of
these things
Ukrainianization and
don't
started
let it
actively
happen.
promoting the ideas of Ukraine and the Ukrainianization.
Oh, I got smoked.
Their motive was obvious. Just before World War I, they wanted to weaken the potential enemy and secure themselves favorable conditions in the border area. So the idea which
maybe that'll
had
make it
emerged
different
in
enough, maybe it
Poland that
won't. I don't
people
know if I should
residing
restart.
in that territory were allegedly not really Russians, but rather belonged to a special ethnic group, Ukrainians, started being propagated by the Austrian general staff. As far back as the 19th century, theorists calling for Ukrainian independence appeared. All those, however, claimed that Ukraine should have a very good relationship with Russia.
I wonder.
They insisted on that.
После революции 1917 года
After the 1917 revolution,
развернулась
the
гражданская
Bolsheviks sought to restore the statehood and the civil war began, including the hostilities with Poland.
Польши в 1921 году, которые, по которым западная
In
часть
1921, peace with Poland was proclaimed, and under that treaty, the right bank of Dnieper River once again was given back to Poland.
в 1939
In 1939, after Poland cooperated with Hitler,
сотрудничала с Гитлером, а Польша сотрудничала.
it did collaborate with Hitler, you know? Hitler offered Poland peace and a treaty of friendship,
Yeah, didn't they cooperate with concentration
an
camps or something like
alliance
that?
demanding in return that Poland give back to Germany the so-called Danzig corridor, which connected the bulk of Germany with East Prussia and Königsberg.
Основную часть Германии с Кёнигсбергом и с Восточной Пруссией.
After World War I, this territory was transferred to Poland, and instead of Danzig, a city of Gdansk emerged.
И вместо Данцига появился.
Hitler asked them to give it amicably, but they refused.
Of course.
Still, they
You
collaborated
know, like,
with Hitler
how many
and
people did the
engaged together
Russians lose in World War II against the
in the
Nazis?
partitioning of
It's like some ridiculous
Czechoslovakia.
day, and they have an entire
May I ask
holiday.
you,
Like we have
you're
the
making
4th
the
of
case
July.
that Ukraine, certainly parts of Ukraine, Eastern
And,
Ukraine, is in effect
You know, Russia has
been
like an
for
entire day of
hundreds
like
of years. Why wouldn't
it's like a
you
Veterans Day,
just take it?
but it's like
when you
a
became
legit
president
like we lost a third of
24
our
years ago. You
population.
have
kind of
nuclear
thing.
weapons, they don't. If it's actually your
So
land,
it makes
why did
sense
you
that
wait
they're
so
like
long?
they talk about like Nazis
sure.
in
I'll
Germany
tell
a
you.
lot because
I'm coming.
literally they lost like a third of
This
their
briefing is
population
coming to an
in
end.
World War
It
II.
might be
so-
boring, but it
It's not
explains
boring.
many
You
things.
just don't know how it's relevant.
Ну, отлично. Тогда мне очень
Good.
приятно, что вы так это оценили.
Good.
Спасибо большое.
I'm so gratified that you appreciate that.
После,
Thank you.
перед Второй мировой
So,
войной,
before
как
World
Польша
War
послушала,
II, Poland collaborated with Hitler, and although it did not yield to Hitler's demands, it still participated in the partitioning of Czechoslovakia together with Hitler, as the Poles had not given the Danzig corridor to Germany
начать второй
and went too far, pushing Hitler to start World War II by attacking them.
в
Why was it Poland against whom the war started on 1st September
It's
1939?
interesting that he's giving him like a history
Poland
lesson.
turned out to be uncompromising, and Hitler had nothing to do but start implementing his plans with Poland. By the way, the USSR, I have read some archive documents, behaved very honestly. It asked Poland's permission to transit its troops through the Polish territory to help Czechoslovakia. But the then Polish foreign
got taken
minister
down?
said that if the Soviet planes flew over Poland, they would be downed over the territory of Poland.
Why?
But that doesn't matter. What matters is that the war began, and Poland fell prey to the policies it had pursued against Czechoslovakia, as under the well-known Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Part of the territory, including western Ukraine, was to be given to Russia.